Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for jumping on to today's CMT Connect webinar with James Trailer. We will be discussing some much needed information on navigating the complexities of finances and benefits and services for people with disabilities. So I think we'll jump on soon now with James. Are you there, James?
Estella, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry,
How are
I was
you?
on a hands-free headset there. I'm doing pretty well.
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. You come highly recommended by one of our board members, Debbie Julieris, who has worked with you personally for her for obtaining some services and much needed, navigating of the complexities of being a parent with a child with a disability. So Zach has CMT, and I know you've worked with their family directly, and we've been learning a lot in the past few weeks speaking with you, and we're very excited to have you on today. Thanks so much, James.
My pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, and just for those of you, those of our listeners who are not familiar with your services, you are an expert and a consultant on this area of work with just consulting families with disabilities. How did you get into this?
Sure. So my youngest sister, Natalie, has a variety of intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I found that regardless of your educational background or personal experience, it's extremely difficult to figure out how various state, local, and federal systems all weave together to provide much needed supports for those that are living, whether it's with CMT or any disability for that matter. So about 13 years ago, we built a business that decided to work with those families, and we have two sides to it. There's one side which we do investment work and we manage trusts and we handle health insurance and different things. But what I'm going to be speaking on today is more on the other side of our business, which is providing education and consulting work for families that are going to navigate a variety of these issues that we're going to get into in just a few minutes.
Great. Thank you. And just as a reminder, this will be recorded for those of you who can't listen to the full session or want to check back and reference later. It will be recorded, and we will be posting it on social media as well as on the H&F website. So feel free to just kind of relax and absorb as much as you can. I know it's a little bit overwhelming, a lot of the information. So we're going to try and piece it down for everyone, and we will have plenty of references to check back with later. So you can kind of just rest assured you'll have that as a resource afterwards. And we do have a Q&A section on the Zoom. On your bottom bar there's a Q&A, so feel free to add your questions or comments in that area, and we'll do our best to make our way to those and answer them as much as we can. And if not, we will do our best to answer them afterwards in a thread and keep the conversation going. So thanks again for your patience. And yeah, let's get started. I know we're gonna kind of focus on 4 different areas. We're gonna be speaking about what the available benefits and services are, the legal structures and dealing with assets, as well as how to navigate finances, long-term planning. And we're gonna kind of be referencing more mild cases of disability versus more severe, children versus adults. So we're going to try and cover a lot there, but we'll try and focus on these 4 areas and just start from there.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone taking the time, and just a brief disclaimer here. Obviously, anyone living with CMT, as many of you know, there's folks that have very mild cases all the way up to pretty significant needs. And so in any type of general presentation, it's kind of like someone trying to teach you to ride a bike at a seminar. I mean, it's extremely challenging. So I'm going to do my best to speak to all different levels of both need and circumstance. And, hopefully you can walk away with this with a little bit more information than you had before. So, little bit of just my important tax and legal disclosure. I know a number of the members of the community had specific questions that, anytime we're giving presentations to large groups, I certainly can't give individual financial, legal, or tax advice in a format like this. So you always need to check with, appropriate professionals in your area before, actually moving on any recommendations. And this presentation is just meant as a guide to get you started. So I think the first place I want to start is helping to understand the benefits landscape and understanding that benefits, as I'm defining them here, can really provide either financial supports or provide health care and then services. So as Estelle and I were discussing, areas to focus, because we have individuals from all over the country on this webinar, I really focused on just the federal benefits. But as you perhaps know from your own family situation, the way in the U.S. at least we provide services is oftentimes at the local level. And we often use various Medicaid-based programs, which are going to be state-specific. So if you live in New York, it may be different than New Jersey, which is different from Texas, and so forth. However, there are some common ground and some general things that apply in all 50 states, or at least in many different states, the territories and the District of Columbia. So the first thing we'll cover is benefits that provide financial supports. So the first is called supplemental security income. This is also commonly referred to as welfare benefits. It's a Social Security benefit, which is federal, and it is paid to individuals that are either at or below the federal poverty level or have a disability. And it's really designed for paying for food and shelter. It's a maximum benefit on the federal side of a little over $770. And various states may provide an additional incentive or additional benefit depending on where you live. So for example, I'm based in New York. New Yorkers either receive $23 or an additional $87 depending on their living situation. So this is one of those benefits that if you have any resources at all, and we define that by being $2,000, you're ineligible. It doesn't matter if those resources are in a retirement account, a savings bond, cash or checking, 2,000, and that number really hasn't changed in the last 30 years. So in a similar vein, there's the Social Security Disability Insurance Program, and we received a number of questions about that program. What that benefit is it's something that you pay into every time you go to work and earn a paycheck. So if you pay FICA tax, part of that is going into the Social Security Fund. So everyone on this call that has worked and has earned money, whether in a variety of ways, will have a different Social Security disability benefit based on the amount of tax that they've paid into the system. Now, there's two different ways you access that benefit. One is on your own working records. So for those that have perhaps a mild case of CMT and have gone out and have worked and have been able to pay taxes, you're going to have your own benefit. But for those of you that have a more significant case, it's actually possible to receive a Social Security benefit off of a parent when the parent either passes away, becomes disabled themselves, or files for their own Social Security retirement benefit. One of those three events can trigger a benefit for an individual living with CMT that meets the definition of disability under the Social Security Act. And we'll come back to that in just a second in terms of what that actually means.
Okay.
There are benefits out there that provide housing assistance. And so whether it's the federal Section 8 program, which is income-based, and it's a voucher-based system. So if you're eligible for the voucher, you can go to any landlord that accepts Section 8 vouchers, and it lowers your net rent. So for example, if it's a $300 voucher and there's $1,000 a month rent, you would only pay the difference, and even then, it may be income tested. There are other state-specific programs that can assist those with affordable housing. whether it's project-based, so it's in a certain apartment complex or location, or some states give incentives to landlords to means test the rent. So if, again, the rent is $1,000, the individual may only pay up to a third, and that's going to be state specific. There's also the federal food stamp program, also called SNAP. SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. That's a federal benefit. It was most recently in the news because both Congress reauthorized the Farm Bill, which includes the SNAP program, which, if you think about it, has nothing to do with farming, has to do with feeding people. Right. But it's a federal benefit that each state administers. So many states were nervous about the individuals eligible for SNAP because when the federal government was shut down, those funds stopped. But it provides approximately $192 per month per individual, and if there are multiple people living in the house, it can be a little bit larger, but it's money that's used for food. And we define food as being either, produce, canned goods, soda, chips, anything that is non-perishable or is considered food in its raw form. What it would not cover would be hot prepared foods. So you could get cold cuts, lettuce, tomato, bread, but you couldn't go get a prepared sub.
Right.
The HEAP program is tied with the food stamp program, and it provides money for heating and cooling. So if you live in the Northeast like I do, this is a big deal for you right now because it's freezing out. Right. If you live in the South or the West where it can be a little bit warmer, there's actually a similar season, but it helps offset the cost of air conditioning. And maintaining regulated body temperatures is extremely important if you have any neurological impairment or condition. And so this is a benefit that for those that qualify can help lower those utility bills. And finally, there is various states, and we'll go over some of them on a subsequent slide, are taking funds that used to go to big institutions for people with disabilities, and they're allowing them to be spent in the home and community in a self-directed manner. So this tends to be the way the services are delivered in the Northeast, on the West Coast, and in the West. In general, as you go south and you go to states that have lower income tax, you're going to have, again, in general, less services, and there's a direct correlation between services and cost. So for states that have high tax or high income tax, like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, California, Oregon, you tend to have more robust services. For states that have lower income taxes, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, and so forth, you tend to have less services for those citizens. So those would be the common federal benefits that are out there to support someone with CMT that meets various definitions, again, that we'll get into. On the other half of the slide are benefits that provide health care and services. So the first is the Medicaid program. Medicaid spending accounts for a tremendous amount of both state budgets as well as the federal budget. It is both a health insurance program for those with low incomes or that do not receive health insurance through an employer. And under the state waiver programs, which what a waiver is it waives money that used to go for a designated health purpose or federal institution and allows those funds to be spent in the home or community on services. So if there's a nonprofit agency that you perhaps rely on for various either home-based care or care coordination or job coaching, it may be that the way that organization is funded is through the Medicaid waiver system. So again, this is where we're getting into the issues with being in various states, because not all states have asked for a waiver of their federal funds, and some can provide the bare minimum, others can go above and beyond. But the Medicaid waiver program, which is often the ticket to using and receiving home-based supports and services, is going to be federal in nature, but then based on the state that you live in.
Okay.
What is not based on the state that you live in is the Medicare program. So earlier I mentioned an individual with CMT may be eligible to get Social Security disability, either on their own working record, if they've paid into the system, or on that of a parent. So after 2 years, 24 months of being on Social Security, disability, income, or insurance, the individual is automatically enrolled in the Medicare program regardless of age. So for those without a disability, you can't access Medicare until you're 65. But we have clients that are 20 and on Medicare because they've been on Social Security disability for 2 years. So it's something that Medicare, being a federal health insurance program, goes with you regardless of what state you live in. And so some of the questions we had from the community were about changing states. If you're on Social Security disability and it's been 2 years and you're enrolled in Medicare, that benefit will go with you regardless of what state you live in. Okay. Finally, there are long-term care-based services, and this can be either funded through the individual state, or it can be funded through private insurance. And we'll talk on a subsequent slide about a mild case of CMT and what to perhaps consider with your available benefits through work. Okay. So I realize this is like learning, drinking through a faucet here, and we could spend 2 hours on each one of these programs. So again, the key takeaway: there's benefits out there for financial support. There are benefits for healthcare and services.
And also, on the last slide for today's presentation, we will have the new page that we set up on the H&F website that has every single state with all of the state offices. So if you have a question, or I think some of these are pretty obvious what office you would contact within your state, but if you have any questions regarding that, we have those resources, that resource page set up for each state. So it makes it a little bit more clear to reach out.
Absolutely, and it's a great tool.
Yep.
So some of the questions we then also had were about what are some legal considerations that I need to be making, either for a family member who's living with CMT or myself if I'm living with it. So first of all is the decision to have someone else assist you in making various decisions if your health were to change significantly, or if a family member's health were to change significantly. And the first document would be having what's called a power of attorney, which would allow someone else to make legal or financial decisions for you, either if you were unable to do so and they could demonstrate that you were unable to do so, or even though you still maintain that power. So for example, if someone on the call is married and living with CMT and they perhaps have a spouse, they may give that power to a spouse to act as if they could to either access a bank account, change a beneficiary designation, buy or sell real property, close things, or have access to certain records. Same thing applies from a health management standpoint, and that would be signing a healthcare proxy, where you designate an individual to make healthcare decisions for you if you're unable to make them. For those that have more significant health concerns or are living with CMT and it's more of a severe case, various states have what is called the guardianship process, where if you are born with a disability that was acquired prior to 22, which is in line with the same definition of disability that the federal government uses, you can petition your local surrogate's court to apply for guardianship over that individual and legally have the authority to continue to make financial, medical, and legal decisions for them. And so you're effectively taking away their civil liberties and returning it to a parent. So think of, or guardian. So think of, if you have a 4-year-old child, you're their legal guardian. They can't really make decisions on their own. This is for someone who's now a 40-year-old child and needs continued advocacy. It's possible that through the court system we can do so if they have a disability that they were born with. There are various different types of guardianship. It's very state specific, but in general, most states have a specific type of guardianship if you either were born with a disability or it was acquired as a child. The other consideration is that if someone passes away and were to leave you assets or would like to direct assets, they oftentimes need to have a will, and they also need to look at how their beneficiary designations are set up with various accounts. Why this is significant is if an individual is trying to qualify for various means-tested government benefits, such as SSI, the SNAP program, Medicaid, many benefits that were designed initially for folks living at or below the federal poverty level. If they were to inherit money, that money can disqualify them for benefits, which is a catch-22. You have someone who may need financial support for the rest of their life, and yet they can't have money in their name, or else they may lose eligibility for things like home care and their health insurance. It's kind of ridiculous, but that's how the system is set up. So oftentimes questions we receive would be, well, if I have a child, for example, with CMT, or if I'm living with CMT and my parents or grandparents have mentioned that they would like to leave me financial resources to help because they know I may need financial support over my life, one of the tools that they can use to do that is called a special needs trust. So a special needs trust is a specific legal document that is available in all 50 states. It's federal law, but each state interprets the law slightly differently. But the context or the usage of a special needs trust is the same across all 50 states. And what it is it's a way to own assets or have assets go into this thing called the trust, which is similar to setting up a corporation. It's a form of legal ownership. So a trust could own a house. A trust could own a car, a trust could own a bank account or a stock portfolio or real property. But the asset, if it's in trust, is not an asset of the individual. So if various state, local, and federal agencies are looking to see what assets are in the name of the individual for purposes of benefit eligibility, any money or assets held in the trust would not be available if it's set up properly, so it wouldn't count against them. So someone could have $1 million in a supplemental needs trust and still be eligible for benefits.
Okay. That's very good to know.
So, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a discussion.
Yeah, we find that these are tools that are useful either. Let's say someone has a mild case of CMT and is working and is saving and is building up financial resources, and then over time their health really starts to deteriorate, and the thought would be they could benefit from services that are based on being at or below the poverty level. So it creates this ridiculous situation where you've done a good job saving, and yet you need services to stay safely in either the home or qualify for additional supports to continue working. So the law was set up so that an individual could actually fund their own trust, transferring money from themselves to their own trust, and qualify then for some of these services and name someone else to manage their affairs. So it's a tremendous responsibility. However, by funding that trust, they're able to keep their money, but qualify for the benefits. The same thing, works if perhaps you have a child with CMT or a family member and you're looking to provide financial support to them. You can set up a trust either at death or during lifetime and direct resources into that rather than directing them directly to the individual, which could potentially disqualify them.
Right. So that's all under the umbrella of special needs trusts then,
whether it is, and
someone else's. Okay.
Yep. So in general, you want to work with an attorney in your area that is both familiar with trusts and estates, as well as what is called elder law planning. That's typically planning for a nursing home. Those type of attorneys are oftentimes well-versed in this type of law. You, in general, would not want to go see a general practitioner, someone that may have done a real estate closing, a divorce, a litigator. You want to find someone that this is their business, because this is a very technical area of law. If it's not drafted properly, you can have real consequences, because someone will be looking at this document, and they usually work for either the Social Security Administration or your state Medicaid authority. And if it's not set up properly, they have a vested interest in disqualifying the trust. So you want to make sure that the person you're relying on for advice, this is their business. One of the other legal considerations is a specific designation in order to handle someone's Social Security benefits. So that individual is known as a representative payee. So if, for example, we go back to my earlier slide where someone is receiving either SSI, supplemental security income, or SSDI, Social Security disability income, and they need assistance managing their financial affairs. The Social Security Administration allows the appointment of someone called the representative payee who can handle that account even if the individual is their own guardian. So for example, with my sister, when she's receiving various benefits, my father can step in as her representative payee, manage her Social Security, pay rent, pay for food, pay for certain things, even though she is still her own guardian. She can still make her own decisions. So it's a specific designation through the Social Security Administration. And it's very useful for those that need a little assistance managing their affairs.
Okay.
The final legal consideration before we move on has to do with the ownership of assets. So again, this is more for those that have a mild case of CMT that are accumulating and they're building. Maybe they own a house, maybe they own a retirement account or a bank account. And as we think over time, is if they're worried about a decline in health, there are ways that they can change the ownership of an asset, whether it goes to a spouse, whether it goes to a trust, whether it goes to someone else, and so they can continue to have the asset, and yet it would not be considered available if they were to qualify for benefits. So it's something that requires speaking with a variety of professionals, someone like myself on the benefits side, oftentimes an attorney who could advise in the proper structure of ownership, and then perhaps a tax professional who could advise you of any potential tax ramifications before you go giving away something.
Right.
So
there's a certain a time frame on those as well.
There can be. So certain states have different requirements for the how quickly you can give assets away and then apply for certain types of benefits.
Right.
So for example, in New York, if you're trying to qualify for a nursing home, it may and you give assets to somebody else and it's not a special needs trust, you could be disqualified from moving into a nursing home for a period of 5 years, depending on the amount of assets that were given away. However, for different types of services, if you were to transfer those assets a different way, you may be able to qualify for Medicaid the following month. Okay. So it just depends on the state. It depends on how the assets were either transferred, and it's really beyond the scope of today's presentation. But the takeaway is that as you're thinking proactively around the future or about the future, you want to think about who can access that money, because if the individual with CMT can access it, Social Security or Medicaid will consider it available to them, even if it's joint. So if a husband and wife have a checking account together, it doesn't matter that the husband or the wife has access. It's considered fully available to the person with CMT. Therefore, it's fully countable. They don't divide by 2. It's 100% countable. So it just requires some thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we had a number of questions about ways to maximize resources. So again, this presentation is not about stocks and bonds. It's about maximizing benefits that are out there and then moving proactively towards continued independence. So one of the tools that is new is that in 2014, President Obama signed into law the ABLE Act. So ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. It's an expansion on the Section 529 College Savings Plan. So like a college savings plan, money that is contributed to it grows in a tax-deferred manner. But unlike a college savings plan, when it comes out, if it comes out for things like qualified disability expenses, which is somewhat of a nebulous concept, but what it means to the IRS is things like housing, things like transportation, things like direct care. So if you need someone to assist you in your home and you're going to pay them privately, that counts. Legal or professional fees, just a variety of things above and beyond college, which college is still a qualified disability expense too. But then the money comes out tax-free. So it could be contributed, it could grow without taxes, and it could come out tax-free. The most significant feature of an ABLE account is that the money held within the ABLE account does not count against various government benefits, whether it's SSI or Medicaid. So we have clients that are saving in these accounts as if it was a retirement fund or an emergency fund, and when they go to then apply for various benefits, the money held in the ABLE account does not count against them.
Okay.
There was a new change most recently with the most recent tax law that Congress passed that allows those that have a 529 college savings plan that either they set up for their child or a grandparent set up or they themselves set up for themselves, you can now roll a 529 plan into an ABLE account without taxes. So that's a new change that is impacting all of us. So,
Okay.
I mentioned earlier there were different ways to receive Social Security disability, and one of which is when a parent files for their own Social Security. So to refresh your memory, let's say there's a husband and wife or partners, and they're both 67 years old, and one goes into the Social Security office and they say, I'm ready to file for my retirement. So one of the questions that should be asked by the field worker, but sometimes is missed, is do you have a family member or a child with a disability? So if that answer is yes, and that disability occurred prior to 22, okay, so it was something, for example, like CMT, that, you have perhaps a formal diagnosis before 22,
Right.
And that child meets the Social Security definition of disability, which means they're either already receiving SSI or already receiving SSDI. Then, when the parent files for their benefit, the child will receive half the parent's Social Security for the rest of their life, as if the parent took it at full retirement, which could be a later date than they actually filed. So to say that another way, let's say the parent took it at 62, which is filing early. The Social Security Administration will look forward to what they would have received at either 66 or 67, and then they would pay the child half of that dollar amount.
Okay.
So for many of our clients, this is new information, and it impacts their decision to file for retirement if they have a child living with CMT.
Right.
So it's just a unique planning opportunity that I think you want to speak with qualified advisors about because it, again, may be new information. One of the questions we received from the community had to do with employment-based benefits. So a very unique feature, especially if you work for a larger corporation, is that the corporation may offer what's called disability insurance. So disability insurance can either be purchased out of payroll deduction or a standalone employee benefit that is not paid for. It's paid for by the corporation. But oftentimes, if it's a larger employer, they do not ask medical questions about your situation. So even if you have a diagnosis of CMT, even if it's more significant, which would prevent you from buying disability insurance on the private marketplace, because unlike healthcare, where they can't discriminate against pre-existing conditions, the disability insurance world can discriminate against pre-existing conditions. It's kind of like trying to buy flood insurance if you live next to a river like the Mississippi River. It can be problematic.
Yeah.
So if someone is at an employer that offers disability, I would strongly encourage you to consider that benefit because, eligibility for that benefit may not be underwritten, or they may not look at your health or pre-existing conditions. And if you were to go out on claim because your health were to deteriorate and you were to need that financial support, and you were to go out on claim while you're still employed, while those benefits are still in existence, oftentimes, depending on the contract, it may last for 2 years, it may last till 65, or perhaps even 67. So it's an extremely important benefit that may be able to provide additional financial income, and it may be able to be acquired even if you have a diagnosis of CMT, if it's a larger employer that doesn't ask medical questions.
Right. I found this super, super interesting because I know this is a big concern in our community with a lot of patients working full time and some of them working in very physical jobs, and they don't have their symptoms until later on in life. And now they're kind of in a career situation where they're not sure how long they can keep up. So I thought this was super interesting, especially the fact that you don't necessarily have to be with a company for years and years to be eligible for the disability benefits. And it also, I mean, it's a portion of your salary, right? Can you give us a little bit more detail on how that works?
Yeah, so it's always going to be case specific based on the employer, but in general, the way the benefits are calculated is it's a percentage of salary. So it could be anything from 30 or 40% to 60%, to maybe as high as 70% of someone's salary. It's usually base salary. If there's any type of bonuses or, incentive-based compensation, it typically just covers the base salary. Right. But as Estella was saying, if you elect this benefit and it's a benefit enrollment period, so maybe in the fall around October, you could be working for the company only for a limited period of time. And if your symptoms and health were to decline and you were to go out on claim while still employed, which is an important thing. Oftentimes these benefits are tied to employment. So if you have to leave because of a medical issue, make sure you're still employed when you do so, because benefits typically terminate if you terminate employment. However, if you go out on disability and you meet the definition of disability that is specific to each contract, so you want to look at the definition and ask an employer or the HR department to give you the definition, and they will do that. Okay. That benefit, can continue for as long as, the contract specifies. Right. So some disability contracts look at the Social Security definition of disability, which is unable to perform the primary duties of any occupation due to a sickness or injury that is expected to last more than 12 months or result in death. Ugh, that sounds terrible. But if someone's living with CMT, their symptoms have gotten so bad that they're unable to work in the same capacity. Perhaps they're using a power chair, perhaps they're needing assistance with activities of daily living. Our experience has been many individuals do meet that definition of disability, right. And may find themselves eligible for that disability insurance. But again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. All of you have different personal health situations. Some may be eligible for this, some may not. And so again, it's something that you want to be aware of, consider, and then explore if it is something offered by your employer. Getting the definition of disability is very important because, again, life insurance is very straightforward. You're either dead or you're alive. But disability, which is part of the human condition, is very subjective. Right. So I could feel that I'm disabled, but another system may not. So the Social Security system, for example, considers if you can make more than $1,220 per month, you're not disabled, regardless if you're living with CMT. So it requires, again, consultation with people that understand the rules, understand the definitions, and then can give you the appropriate guidance.
Right. So you don't necessarily want to jump the gun on quitting your job or getting a part-time job or, working from your home freelance. I mean, this is definitely something to consider before, pulling the gun on leaving your full-time position.
Absolutely. And if you're in a position where, perhaps you have a personal relationship with the business owner and they're considering different ways to incentivize key employees, it may be that they may consider offering a disability insurance package. And if someone were to go out on claim, it doesn't come out of the employer's pocket. It's paid for by the insurance policy. Right. So again, it's something that needs to be transparent. You can't just, hide information, but it's something that can be considered depending on your specific situation. Yeah. So in the interest of time, we got to keep moving because I still have a little bit to cover. But one of the benefits that we received some questions about was surrounding care and hands-on care for assistance with whether it's in the home in the community. And this is one of those programs that's going to be based on the state that you live in. And it's either through one of two different, as I mentioned earlier, state waiver programs. So one specifically, not to be too technical, is called the 1915K waiver. That's currently available in California, New York, Maryland, Oregon, and Texas. There's another one called the 1915 BC waiver, which is available in many other states. But to make a long story short, these are programs that use Medicaid dollars, which used to be purely for health insurance, and they allow an individual to hire caregivers to assist them in activities of daily living. So eligibility for this program is dependent on being on Medicaid. So you can't necessarily just sign up for it if you're, for example, not on Medicaid. It requires eligibility for Medicaid and meeting and needing home-based care. So typically it requires a nurse's evaluation. So someone needs to say, yes, you need assistance with activities of daily living. So that combination of being on Medicaid and then needing the care can allow you to enroll in one of these programs and begin the process of hiring your own staff, which in some states includes a family member or perhaps a parent. So by no means is it for everyone. You still have to meet the definition of disability, but states are finding in general that it is cheaper to give people choices to hire their own staff, even if it's perhaps a family member or someone they know and trust, than it is to impose caregivers or force someone into a living situation not of their choosing, which typically results in a much higher cost and worse outcome. I mean, let's be honest, who wants to live in some facility? You know, most of us want to live with people we choose in the community we want to, and this allows us to do so.
And the caretaker has to be 18 years or older?
In general, the caretaker has to be 18 years or older. Okay. So by no means is it a one-size-fits-all approach, but I do feel for many of us, the goal is to never move into a nursing home, which for some people, depending on their level of need, you know, can sometimes unfortunately be the outcome. So programs like this allow those to stay in the home as long as possible. Okay. So that final bullet point is understanding the impact of resources on certain means-tested benefits. What I mean by that, again, is if you're looking for Medicaid eligibility, each state has slightly different rules, but in general, they follow the federal guidelines, which is having less than $15,450 in assets. Some states exclude retirement assets, some states don't. So it's not, in the scheme of things, over someone's entire life, it's not an enormous amount of money. Many states and the federal government, in fact, exclude certain resources. So they exclude a house, they exclude a car, they exclude a prepaid burial account that you can't cash out. They exclude personal belongings, so clothing, jewelry, books, furniture, but they do look at cash. So, or securities or investments. So getting back to my maximizing resources concept, they do not count money in an ABLE account. They do not count money in a properly drafted supplemental needs trust or special needs trust, same thing. So understanding the impact of resources is the first step towards building your own strategy, either for your family member or for perhaps yourself, to position things in such a way that you could perhaps take advantage of the benefit as well as have the resource. Okay, so laying out just a few generalizations here, and then we'll follow up with just some specific questions, and then we'll kind of take it from there. For an individual that is living, you know, with a mild case of CMT, things that we would recommend would be looking at all available benefits that are at work to see if there's something that you might be able to take advantage of. And if it may be elective. So elective means that, you know, all employees may get a certain benefit, but you may be able to check a box to add on to the existing benefit for a cost, which would be coming out of your paycheck. I'd strongly consider looking at that because, you know, it may provide a necessary or needed amount of financial security that may be unattainable on the private marketplace because of a pre-existing condition.
Right.
I think continuing to build savings is good for all of us on the call, regardless of our situation. And yet, if the fear is that over time health may deteriorate, thinking about where those savings are located is critical. So whether it's an ABLE account, whether it's in a retirement fund that's exempt based on the state that you live in, whether it's in the name of a spouse, whether it's inside an asset that is not included, like equity in a home. Just continuing to build savings, but being thoughtful about where you're placing it is important. Having an understanding of federal and state work incentive programs. So many states want an individual with a disability, such as CMT, to work and continue to work and not be on benefits. It's possible to earn a year and still, if you have a disability and you need Medicaid in order to work. Now, that may not be the case in many other states, so it's something that, again, is unfortunately state-specific. However, both the federal government and almost all states have a vested interest in keeping people earning, working, and let's be honest, paying taxes. So they oftentimes incentivize that by raising some of the asset and income thresholds so that someone can continue to be productive in society and pay into the system. So that's something that you want to look at in your specific state. And the most states have what are called work incentive counselors. So they could be either employed at the Social Security office in your area, or various nonprofits get contracts through the Social Security Administration to provide this specific advice in your area. So your first step would be reaching out to your local Social Security office and asking for the designated work incentive counselor, and they'll be able to direct you to that person.
Okay.
The final thing is building a plan for changes in health and need. And let's be honest, none of us know what the future holds, but if you're living with CMT and you've been in communication with your physicians and your family and know your own body, we need to be pragmatic about the fact that health may change in the future. So if we go into that with eyes wide open and can position things appropriately, we can oftentimes leave the door open to services that might be useful rather than trying to scramble should something change quickly, whether it's due to a fall or due to just, any other circumstance. And then you have to typically spend more money, more stress, and more time fixing things rather than being thoughtful.
Right.
When someone's living with a more severe case of CMT, understanding the Social Security and Medicaid definition of disability is critical. Many times we have our clients accessing things like SSI when the individual with CMT turns 18. It's not to say they can't access it before 18, but before 18, eligibility for that benefit is based on household income and household resources. So if there's perhaps working parents, that may make them ineligible depending on the level of income. But when the child turns 18, eligibility is now based on the child's income and the child's assets. So they may, if both are low, they may be eligible for Social Security at that point, which creates some neat planning opportunities, because if the child is receiving that Social Security, they need to pay the parent rent. The parent may be able to save that money perhaps for their future once they've collected the rent. So it's kind of some neat things to be thinking about. Also understanding that eligibility for Medicaid, especially at 18 in most states, is also based on the individual's income and resources. And if they're on a state waiver program, that might waive parental income and resources earlier. So they might even be able to receive Medicaid as a child, again, depending on the severity of the CMT. So being able to access home and community-based services may allow that individual to stay in the home or participate fully in the community and rely on those Medicaid-based services even if the parents do have income and resources. And finally, if it's likely that the individual will be benefiting from Social Security and Medicaid benefits, you want to have a strategy to make sure that resources do not go directly to the individual with a disability, and that perhaps you consider using a trust, and then notifying the rest of your family that that's a tool that you've considered.
Right.
So the final questions, which will take us to the end of the presentation here. And again, I'll preface, can't give specific tax advice, but there were some questions about what are some tax breaks for those with disabilities? You know, what is an ABLE account? So we touched on what an ABLE account is.
Right.
Specifically, this individual mentioned, can I deduct caregiver expenses I pay for someone to care for me in my own home? So a little bit of a tricky question, because most recently, you know, this past year was the first year of the new tax change. So for many of us, the ability to deduct itemized expenses is no longer, because you know, they've increased what's called the standard deduction for a single person, and I believe it's $12,000, and for a married couple, it's $24,000. Again, check with a CPA on that. But in order for an expense to typically be deductible, you know, you'd have to have more than those numbers, 12 or 24,000 in expenses, and even after that, the IRS has a specific limit for how much money you have to spend on caregiver expenses before it's deductible. And it's bounced around between 10% of your adjusted gross income and 7.5% of your adjusted gross income. So it depends on the circumstances again, but it may be possible to deduct caregiver expenses if the sum of all of that, you know, those expenses after, you know, reaching that threshold, plus your other itemized deductions, is in excess of the standard deduction. So you take whatever is, you know, puts you in a better situation. So I realize that's kind of technical, but unfortunately, taxes are a little tricky.
Yes, they are.
So for Medicaid planning, do you have any recommendations for Medicaid planning for those with CMT? Again, I mentioned earlier, you know, oftentimes retaining someone who's an attorney that specializes in that area to discuss the different options that you may have in your area based on the state laws that you have. But the generalization I can make is that you generally want to work with an estate planning attorney that has an expertise in elder law and Medicaid planning. Please do not reach out to your generalist, because again, they may have this ability, but oftentimes we find they lack the specific knowledge, and we're messing around with healthcare, and we're messing around with services. These are very expensive benefits, and so it may cost a little bit more, but in my opinion, it's oftentimes worth it.
Absolutely.
Custodial care. Are there programs that can help someone pay for activities of daily living assistance at home? We mentioned earlier in the presentation benefits that are both, you know, your options are either you pay somebody privately, you have somebody do it for free, whether it's a family member, or you qualify for various services, oftentimes through the Medicaid system, in order to then identify and hire your own caregivers. Again, that last one's going to be state specific. In general, if you're in a higher tax, northern, far west, or western state, you're going to have those programs. In general, the further south you go into the lower income tax states, those programs are much more challenging to find. And so we find that many times individuals living with CMT, as their needs continue to change, you know, may need to consider a different state that has a more robust service offering for its citizens. Those are very, very difficult challenges to consider, because oftentimes your family support may be different from where you might be able to get non-family support.
Right.
The disability insurance, you know, if I can no longer work full-time in my current job, should I cut back on hours or find another job or apply for disability? I think it's important to consider disability through work. Remember, that might be insurance-based. If you cut back on hours or find another job, the new job may not have that robust benefits package, so you want to kind of think about that before changing employers, especially because a small firm may not have the same benefits that perhaps a larger one does.
Right.
Applying for disability can be tricky too, because in order to apply for Social Security disability, you have to be out of work, and you have to be out of work because of the disability. So it's somewhat of a catch-22. You can't simply quit your job and then apply for disability. You have to have been able, you would have had to have stopped working because of the disability and then apply. And it varies on the length of time and because it depends on the specific severity of the CMT and other healthcare factors. So that's a very tricky question that unfortunately has to be addressed on an individual basis. What is very clear is number 5, this person owns a residence and relocated in 2013 and that house is underwater. Does the loss affect earnings for disability income? That's a great question, but with Social Security disability, it does not matter what your losses were from other types of assets. All they care about is the amount of Social Security tax you paid on your earned income. So that would be wages that you paid FICA tax on. It does not include rents, royalties, dividends or interest, or perhaps passive losses from a property that's underwater, either figuratively or literally. Finally, we had a question right before we started the presentation about health insurance. If I file for and get disability benefits, can I receive health care outside of my home state? So I'll qualify that by saying if you applied for Social Security disability, then after 24 months, you'll be eligible for Medicare. Medicare would go with you whether you're in Tennessee or Virginia. If the disability that you qualified for is through your employer, that employer may keep you on the health insurance plan or may not, depending on the state and the situation, in which case, in general, that's going to be network-based and is going to be tied to the region that you're in, because they just may not have relationships and you'd be then out of network on your health care, which could increase the cost, again, depending on your circumstances. So if the health insurance is Medicare, Medicare is federal, you can go to any
Right.
state in the union.
Okay.
Okay, there's there's contact information. Again, we specialize in families that are typically in New York, although we do have clients all over the country, but in general, we're working with families in states where there's a little bit more robust in the way of services. We do have clients in Florida and Georgia, however, there's just not as much in the way of services. So I think, Estella, that's
Yes.
it, and we're
Wow,
just before 2 o'clock.
You rang it right in there. I know we have 2 more quick questions. I'm not sure if you have another 2 or 3 minutes.
I do. If you could
Okay.
read the question to me,
Yeah,
that'd be great,
absolutely.
so I don't screw up the presentation.
Sure. This one is an anonymous attendee. I am on Social Security disability. I have no private disability insurance. My husband's income is over $150,000. Am I correct that there are no other benefits for me, as fortunately I am able to walk without AFOs?
Yep. So that's going to be, again, it's going to depend on the state you're in.
Okay.
Oftentimes, Medicaid benefits are based both on income and assets. So some states allow for the separation between the spouse that needs support and they just look at their income. Others look at the combined income. And however, I would say in general, most states would consider the combined income of the family when applying for home-based care and benefits. So unfortunately, you are correct. We've had families work through that. In certain states, there's a process for essentially having your spouse say, I refuse to provide care, but that's a very sticky situation that can oftentimes cause the state to try and sue you to force your spouse to provide care. So I would say in general, it's going to be based on household income, and you may be out of luck, unfortunately.
Okay. Makes sense. And this last one is from Matt. Specifically, what disability benefits are you suggesting we try to get through work?
Sure. So there could be really 3 that might be worth considering, again, on an individual basis. So one would be seeing if the employer offers short-term disability. Short-term is typically defined by being limited in scope, so whether it lasts for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, but generally never beyond that amount. That's typically going to be the highest cost benefit because it's the most likely to be used. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, not just those with CMT go out on disability. Many of us, could have a fall or develop a critical illness, go out, but then want to come, be able to come back, not want. want to be able to come back. The second benefit I'm referring to is called long-term disability. So long-term disability typically picks up after the short-term expires. That may go on for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, till age 65, or perhaps to age 67. It's either employer paid, in which case it would be taxable to you when you receive it and you're not contributing, or it could be voluntary, in which you elect at benefit enrollment to buy the coverage. And then what would be the ideal situation is if you speak with your HR person to see if that benefit is what's called portable. Portable means if you were to leave the employer, that benefit could come with you. It may come with you at a higher cost,
Right.
but nonetheless, you would have been able to receive it without having to have had to disclose that you're living with CMT. The third and final benefit is some employers offer long-term care insurance at group rates for a fee. So again, you would pay for that out of your payroll, but again, they typically wouldn't ask you certain medical conditions which may allow you to receive that benefit without having to disclose that you have CMT, where if you tried to buy that long-term care insurance on the open marketplace, you would almost always be declined. Right. Because insurance is only typically sold for when you can't control the outcome. But in this case, we may know that your health may decline in the future, and it's something that would be looked at. So those are the three benefits: short-term, long-term, long-term care.
Okay, thank you so much. That definitely clarifies a lot for us. And like you said, I know it's a lot of information, but I think it's a great start in how to kind of approach navigating our finances and our future, and just being more strategic with our planning and careers and family. So I thank you again for your time, and I encourage everyone to reach out to you and your office if they have any more questions or would like to speak with you regarding services, and also to check out our new page right at the top there on the H&F website with state-by-state resources and office information, contact info for you to get started. So thanks again. We'll be posting this on the H&F website as well as on social media for those of you who cannot watch the entire webinar. And yeah, thank you so much, James.
No, it's my pleasure, and best of luck as everyone's navigating this. Just hang in there and keep going to these type of webinars, because it takes a while to figure this out. I've been at it for 13 years, and I still learn something every day. So
it does. We definitely learned a lot, and thanks so much. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Everyone. Thank you.